a neuroscientist and also a neuroscientist in the spectrum of neuroscience on the biophysical side. So actually it was I who tried to show that an amoeba could do otherwise. So I'm supposed to comment upon 7 talks, and I turned out that 6 of those were given by philosophers, and there was one neuroscientist. So it is a little unfair, very unfair to the philosophers, because I miss quite much of the subtle, nice arguments and so on that you have presented today. Furthermore, it turns out that when I looked at other commentators, they had 2 or 3, at maximum 4 talks to talk about, and I have 7 and some minutes. So what?
Give you more time.
I don't need that. I mean, the best thing is, of course, the panel discussion. Then the real thing will show. I can just give some observations, some common sense observations. And the first thing I will comment upon is the question that has often been called the hard problem. That is, how come that electromagnetic or electrochemical activity in a certain structure will in some way cause, or will at least be in some way associated or correlated or whatever with mental states. I think this is really a hard problem, and it's a little remarkable that it has been so little discussed, or almost nothing. Mark touched upon it and said the same thing, that it was a little remarkable, because after all, and in your case, you talked about that the activity in the parietal region in some way was associated with awareness and some mental state. And the question is, of course, what activity there is doing this? What is the critical activity that other activities in areas close by don't give rise to this? This, I think, would have been very interesting to hear more about, and now we have a chance here at the panel discussion to discuss this a little more. And furthermore, I mean, another observation was that dualism has been mentioned several times, and always with very negative connotations. So, and if you think it's very common to talk about emergentism, that consciousness as an emergent property, and it can be discussed that people often talk today about weak and strong emergence. And with weak emergence, it's more or less something very unexpected that happens. But strong emergence, that is something which cannot be deduced from lower states. And if this is the case, and consciousness is maybe seen as such a strong emergence, to me this sounds like a rather dualistic picture. So why is everyone so afraid of being dualist in that case? I mean, after all, mental states and physical normal states are different from each other. It strikes me that people are it's like a political debate. Something, you cannot really point to why it's so dangerous. And I think Alfred mentioned this somewhere. And also Walter mentioned in his presentation the background to his position, the epiphenomenalism, that Thomas Huxley was one of the first proponents. And a problem with that position, and that might be discussed later on, is of course that it seems difficult doesn't go well with evolution after all. And this is also a problem in many of the discussions here. There are things, I mean, if the mental states are something that follows from nerve activity but does not have any causal efficiency at all, then why do we have it? This is something I would very much like to hear more about. Furthermore, one central piece that we have been discussing today is the Libet story about the Bereitschaftspotential, and it seems to be that is nowadays there is a tendency, or a strong tendency, if I understand it right, that this is a statistical artifact, more or less. But nevertheless, Libet himself did not interpret his studies as if will was an illusion. He rather presented what he called the veto hypothesis. And that also is something that I have not heard very much of at all. It might be that this is totally out, but I think it would be interesting to hear that interpretation. And as far as I understand, even though then, if this is a statistical artifact, still his veto hypothesis is still an interesting case that should be discussed. Yeah. Well, those the seven talks that I'm trying to in some way comment now, as far as I understood it, there was one that presented free will as an illusion, I guess, more or less, and 6 against. Is that understood in the right way? That I would like to have more cleared up here on stage later on. So I'm looking forward very much to this discussion. What is am I not close to? I had perhaps one comment too. It was when Ingrid talked about Charles Saunders Peirce and his abductive inference. It sounded to me quite close to ideas that, for instance, Karl Popper presented, how new knowledge is gained. And I would very much like to hear more about the relation, but those thoughts and the Peirce ideas. And I know that Popper thought Peirce was a very interesting philosopher. Now it happens to be that I and a colleague of mine sitting there, Ingmar Lindahl, we have had interaction with Popper, and maybe I'm a little influenced by him, but he also had some rather provocative thought that also could be of some interest here, because he separated between something he called scientific and philosophical criticism. And while he said that the philosophical criticism, that is how philosophers attack a statement, and they say that this is based on that and that proposition, and then they show that this proposition as such does not hold in. And this is, and while the scientific criticism would be that you draw the consequences, the predictions from the statement, and then test it in some way. You find out whether they are, it works or not works. And in Popper's case, he said that while the scientific way of doing it gives us all new knowledge all the time, this other way doesn't give very much. So this, of course, is rather negative toward the philosophers, but what I felt during these days, or these 2 days at least, that philosophers seem to work with predictions. That's some sort of experimental type of philosophy nowadays. Is there a new breed of philosophers? That is the question I want to hear from the panel also. So, okay, at that base, I think I stop. Thank you.
So, I think that gets into the problem again. This is the hard problem. What is, in fact, consciousness? And I don't think we have, or anywhere close to the answer to that. And I think that is a very big problem to a certain extent in the field. But I think one of the things that the conference illustrates is that we can talk about free will and intentions to some extent and learn about them, even though we don't understand consciousness fully yet. So I think that we have a long way to go. So just so I understand the philosophical term, when you say you're not a substance dualism, that means you still believe that the conscious states arise from the brain. Is that what you? Yes. Yes. Okay. Well, I would be willing to admit that that's true.
I can talk about Libet's veto since that was raised. Hello. Is it on? Yeah. So Libet thought he had two kinds of evidence for veto power. And one was that after the experiment, subjects sometimes said, no, sometimes I had an urge or intention to flex my wrist, but I didn't do it. And Libet also did a veto study. And the way to picture it is, well, you prepare to flex when the spot hits a certain point on the clock, but don't do it. That's the instruction. So prepare to do it, let's say, when it hits the 9 o'clock point, but don't do it. And what he got with that study, and he could back average from the time, was a curve that looked a bit like a type 2 RP. It started earlier than, like a type 1 RP. It started earlier than the RPs you've seen. I'll draw it in the air. And it petered out 150 to 250 milliseconds before the designated time. And he said, look, I found veto power. And his thought was, once you become conscious of, say, an intention to do a thing now, you have about 1/10 of a second to veto it. So consciousness never initiated actions, but it could quash them. And a quick way to see a flaw with the veto experiment is to do our own. So we could try it. It just takes about 3 seconds. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to count 1, 2, 3. And what I want you to do is to prepare to snap when I get to 3, but don't do it. Okay? It's just like his, except it's finger snap. So, and if you wanted to, you could pay close attention to what's going on in your head. So prepare to do it, but don't do it. 1, 2, 3. Nobody snapped. So who intended to snap when I got to 3? Nobody. And part of the content of your intention was don't do it. But if we took EEG from your head under these circumstances, we'd get a curve that looked like his. So the veto experiment was in short, a failure.
Well, look for the audience to chime in, or?
Yes.
I mean, there's this recent study from Schultz-Kopp from John Dillon's lab. What they found was that 200 milliseconds before the movement is the point of no return. So Libet thought that 200 milliseconds was the magic moment after which you could then intervene and exercise your veto power because you were conscious. According to the newer Schultz-Kopp study, 200 milliseconds is precisely the point in time after which you can no longer veto. It's the point of no return. So they can't both be right.
Yeah.
And I'm inclined to believe the Schultz-Kopp study.
Well, there are different experiments that get a slightly different time for it. I'm not sure that that's a critical thing. It depends on exactly how you do the experiment, what sort of stimulation that is triggering the different things in this regard. So I'm not sure that there's going to be one time only that will be relevant in all situations. Just in terms of other aspects of veto, if you have someone making a continuous movement or a tonic movement and ask them to stop at some freely chosen point, then you also have what looks like a proper Brightshaw potential in front of it. So it looks exactly like a movement related potential from 0 to something. You get the same thing from something to 0. If you have a multi-choice activity and you decide, and then you're given information in between the go signal and then to decide which way to go, and you can decide using the lateralized readiness potential as to which particular hemisphere is in fact facilitated for this. You can see that the hemisphere that is facilitated, the negativity continues to rise, and in the hemisphere that is not where there's a veto, it goes down in the same way that you were talking about it before. So you can see competing drives from the two hemispheres, both originally going up, and then when you get the second information, one dies and the other one continues to move up. So the brain actually prepares most alternatives that it's intending to do, but it sounds like in the experiment you did, no one was really intending to do it. But if you actually have intentions, then both of them do build up, and then you can actually show that one dies and the other increases. You can also do that with transcranial magnetic stimulation, similar to the EEG, where on the side of the one that you want to do, the MEP continues to rise, and on the other side it drops off. So you can actually show this in two different ways. While I had this, can I ask a question? Because I'd be interested in other people's views on this. Is it necessary to have conscious awareness to have free will?
Ask Tim.
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, try to imagine a scenario where we thought we had an agent-like individual, but that had no conscious awareness at all at any time and when they were acting. I mean, it might be a kind of controlled behavior, right? We have very simple kinds of animal organisms that we have no good reason to think are consciously aware. They do things, so there's a kind of behavior, motivated behavior.
Consciously aware of what? Do you have to be consciously aware of the background causes, consciously aware of your motivations, or consciously aware of simply what you're doing?
Aware of what you're doing and what you're intending to do. Yeah, one thing I guess I wanted to say about this business of awareness of one's intention, you know, there's focal awareness, of course, we're familiar in perception, and peripheral awareness of things in our visual field, and I think something like that distinction generalizes to conscious phenomena. And so I think it's plausible that certainly when we're not preoccupied in doing habitual behavior or something, when we're actually deciding, we're aware of our intending to do what we do. But it may not be ordinarily when we're not reflecting and trying to act like philosophers and catch ourselves in the act of consciously intending. We're not focused, of course, on our mental state, but I don't think it follows And we may be unreliable after the fact, we apparently are, to pin down the precise time when that occurs, but that doesn't entail that there wasn't some kind of conscious awareness of the intention as it was happening in real time.
So let's say that we're walking down this, I don't know, walking down here and just to follow up with this story before so we're walking down the hallway and our intention is something general like getting to the music that's going to come in 15 minutes. But then we open doors, we climb stairs, all of that, so you would say that we are consciously aware of all of those, or would you just, I'm trying to, you talk about the focal and non-focal.
Yeah, so I'm one of those people that Al was calling a restrictivist. That is, I think we
call each other's names.
Yeah, right. that is, I think we anchor our the way we think of freedom and responsibility in a relatively limited subset of the things we do. Much of the time, what we do is habitual. We're not paying attention to what we're doing. We're thinking about things, but we're acting in a very well-mannered, goal-directed kind of way. I'm not forming a zillion little intentions, right? We'd be exhausted by noon if we were doing that, right? It's just relatively, so you talk about walking down the hall, no, I'm probably chatting with someone, I'm not even thinking about what I'm doing, and yet I get there without tripping.
And that's part of the focal versus non-focal?
Yeah, so well, in that sort of case, I wouldn't want to say that I'm actively forming an intention, right? Often a lot of my intentions are passively because I'm programmed in a sense, in a way. I already have long-standing purposes. I want to get to the dinner. I already knew that, and I'm just, probably even subconsciously responding to various kinds of cues and navigating my way. So I don't think of that as a type of active intention. I would assume that's an essentially quasi-deterministic kind of process.
I think you're the chairman. If you're ready to go ahead.
I was thinking that. I've forgotten what I wanted to say. Now, yes, okay, it's back. Don't we normally, when we act for reasons of goals more than any actions in the sense of movements? We don't think about movements normally. We think I should go and pick the car or something, right? So it's a goal or something, and most often, actually, I think none of us really know how to move.
I agree.
If we had to do that, I think we would all fall over because we don't even know how to keep our balance standing. So I think this consciousness thing about the intention and what we want is something very, very rough. Yeah. So it's really just something like that. I want to eat. I want to have fun. I want to dance, whatever. But not to move or press a button or something like that. It's very unusual.
I agree, and I don't want to dominate the discussion, so I'll just say this. I agree, and to put it in the lingo that philosophers of mind would put it in, the content of my intention very often is just the goal, achieve that goal. It's certainly not move my arm with such and such force at such and such trajectory. It's nothing like that.
It exists in ballet, for instance, when the motion itself is the goal of the perfection of the motion and so on, but otherwise it's very unusual.
So then you would in fact agree that you don't have to have a conscious intention of a movement for it to be freely chosen, or to be a manifestation of you don't have to have a conscious sense of the intention, and you're still willing to call it free will, right? I mean, that's what you just said, right? You're willing to admit that you have an idea of a goal and you're doing something else and you're not thinking about the individual.
I'm a philosopher. I'm happy to get paid to talk, so I really am happy to respond to the question. I'm just feeling a little anxious here. I don't want to dominate the panel discussion, but I guess what I would say is, and I think this shows up in these polling when you ask people are they free when they do things that are just obvious. I think, when I do things that are consistent with my long-standing intentions, that I have no reason to reconsider, and that I say that I might be carrying out deterministically, maybe even purely subconsciously, it's been getting executed. I would say in a derivative sense that's free because I'm aware of the fact that I don't have to be, or at least to some degree, I can rethink my goals, and so the rest of my behavior sort of, you might say, inherits my primary freedom that gets exercised in these more focal kinds of decisions. That's the rough way I'm thinking about it.
We have two questions here from the auditorium. Anna first.
Yeah, should I take I'm not so loud of voice, but I think that, thank you. My question, I would like to ask it to Walter and Tim. And I would like to go back to the question of...
Walter is not with us anymore. He has actually a meeting with his provost right now, and he cannot join us.
I'm sorry, I missed it before. Oh, that's a pity, actually. But Tim, you have to help with that, right? Well, Walter named that this book about we are our brains, right? So I have, of course, a problem with that. I'm a monist too. But in that monism, there is some kind of dualism in the way that, as I see it, like, okay, if you say there is a monism, and I would not necessarily want to worry, but there must be a physical dimension and a mental dimension, because, and between these ones, there must be a mutual causation, and that's my point of view, because otherwise, if that would not be the case, no dimensions and no mutual causations, we would be robots. On the one hand, on the other hand, the brain would never be plastic, and the brain is plastic. The brain goes to changes due to our mental activities.
Okay.
So, what would you say about that?
All right, I'll just give a real quick answer, and then I think that might be an interesting question, how comfortable people are with that kind of straightforward identity claim. I would say that I'm a biological organism, okay, and that's a physical thing. I just think there's a irreducible duality of my states, and the physical states are more fundamental and they give rise to mental states. So I just wouldn't say I am my brain, because I think there's more to me than just my brain. I might get reduced, sadly, to just my brain in some horrible science fiction scenario where they keep my brain alive and separate me from my body. But apart from that, so I am my brain doesn't automatically entail physicalism in a strong sense, that everything is physically realized, all states are physical states. It just means that the thing that I am is fundamental. It's a physically composed thing. I agree with that.
Yeah, just to say, I mean, I do agree that people are more than their brains, but what I was intending to mean there is that I believe that the qualities or qualia arise from the brain. That's the part of the body that creates the qualia. At least that's what I think is the case. But I don't really know where qualia come from.
Well, if your brain is dead, you have no quality.
I'm sorry?
If your brain is dead, you have no quality.
If your brain is dead, you have no qualia. So, I mean, I certainly believe that, but...
is there anyone who doesn't?
It doesn't come from your heart. Right. That's true. But, yeah. That's what I was intending to mean. The qualia are coming from the brain, and that's the equivalence that I was talking about.
Yeah, but at the same time, if you take a pianist, for instance, a piano player, like through all the years of training, I mean, and not only the physical, but especially the mental, because you have to read these two different keys, and it's not only different hands, it's also two different keys. So, and this training actually enhances specific structures in the brain. So there is a causation from the mental to the brain that changes the brain. At the same time, of course, the brain grows the plasticity and it acts upon the mental.
So the work you're quoting is probably the work from my group, because we actually showed what goes on in the brain when you learn to play the piano or learn to do other tasks. And I certainly believe that the brain is highly plastic, and I know all the details that go on with motor learning. All the control signals come from the brain, that control the hand. Of course, there's going to be somatosensory feedback that is ongoing at the same time. It's an interaction, and also auditory feedback is very important for that too, to some extent. But I'm not sure that the fact that the brain is plastic relates to the issues that we're talking about.
We have one more question.
We have two, actually. Till and then Peter.
Okay, so I want to stay on consciousness, but I want to break the consensus a little bit. There seems to be a consensus that the heart problem is interesting for our question. I doubt that. The heart problem is supposed to be specifically about the phenomenal aspect of consciousness rather than the functional aspect of consciousness. But if that is what we're talking about when we're talking about qualia and the heart problem, why should that matter for free will? I'm not sure. I mean, maybe there is a clear connection, maybe there's an intuitive connection, but I'm not sure I see it. Then if we go slightly weaker and say, well, no, we didn't mean phenomenal, we meant functional, there's a functional side to consciousness, that's the thing that we're interested in. Yeah, it might be true that there is a connection between consciousness and free will or rational agency, but I think I'd go for a defensive Wegner against Tim's performative argument, that's performative contradiction. It's not clear to me that it's impossible that a system that's not using its consciousness couldn't produce rational, intentional behavior. I mean, if you think about it, we have systems nowadays like chess computers that produce rather surprisingly sophisticated behaviors that look very intentional and rational. Now, they are not as complex as we are. Sure, so it might be true that we definitely produce behaviors that are very different from chess computers. But why it needs to be the case that these behaviors are produced that they only can be rational and intentional if there's consciousness, it doesn't seem obvious. Philosophy has argued long and hard about what the connections between rationality and consciousness and intentionality are. So I'm not sure I see the clear, intuitive, obvious connection.
Before you answer, please hold your memory of this Till's question and ask the last question by Peter, and then we have to close the session.
All right, it is on? Yeah, so this relates a bit to Till's question. So we shouldn't necessarily assume that the contents of consciousness are monolithic. They could be diverse. Some of them could be retrospective and others prospective. So an example of a retrospective qual might occur in the case of efference copy. So before I make a motion, I have a plan, and then I do it, and if it matches, I say, I did it. And that I did it might be a feeling. There's no reason to think that that feeling is causal of that action. And maybe W is of that form, or maybe not. But then there are prospective uses, perhaps for conscious operands. There might be mental operations that can only take place over conscious operands. One of those might be, for example, if I say to you, describe to me the contents of your conscious experience, and then you do. I would think that what you say would depend partly on what you're experiencing before you say it. Another might be, I could knock out your conscious experience by putting continuous flash suppression in one eye, and then find there's all kinds of things you can't do, even though in the other eye there's, say, multiple objects moving around, and I say, volitionally track the one in the upper left, and you say, well, I don't see anything. So I think it's very likely that there are many mental operations that require conscious mental operands, and those would be prospective uses of qualia.
That answer to Till's question.
I think it'd be partly an agreement to the first half that we should dissociate qualia and the functional aspects of consciousness, and then for the second part, well, I've not said that it's impossible that there is a connection between consciousness and intentional action. I just said that I don't see why there is a necessary connection, why we just go from, well, this is our intuition. We should be very careful. 50 years ago, 20 years ago, people would have said, a computer that plays better chess than a human, you need to have proper intelligence for that. Well, not anymore.
I'll just say that I think a plausible form of dualism will reject this kind of modern tendency to bifurcate these purely qualitative aspects of conscious experience and say that's the residue we can't quite account for in physicalistic terms, but the intentional content of cognitive states, even of conscious cognitive states, we can in principle. I doubt that. In fact, I don't think we have a good account of that. And at any rate, I would want to say, like just think about your current visual sensory state. If any kind of dualism is true, and you say, well, the looks of colors, the subjective quality, these are properties of your conscious experience. Well, here's something else that's a property of your current conscious visual experience. It represents to you a world with bodies in relative sizes and relationships to one another. It's full of content, in other words. That's part of my conscious state, too. So so there's no way of separating and saying one aspect is non-physical and the other isn't. They're inextricably bound together, I believe.
Okay,